go. Good, much better. That way I won't have to holler. I didn't want to have to do that. Well, thank you for letting me be here in Xenia, Ohio. This is my first time to be up in this neck of the woods preaching in a long time. I've been up in this area, not in Xenia, but in other places. It's just great to be here. Fun to be with Stephen and Jacob. They were students of mine there at Lipscomb, but especially fun to be with Chuck and Melinda because we go way back to the days. I was the preacher at Laurel during the time that Chuck and Melinda were supported in their work in Hong Kong. And so we got to know each other really well then, and it's just been great to reminisce and, to see Chuck aging so well. It's just great to see that and to see that he's at such a place that is willing to have the old preacher hang around, that kind of thing. But I know you have a gem in them and also in Stephen and Jacob. You really do. And it's just, and I will tell you, the weekend that I've spent with the elders and the deacons and the ministers has just been a joy. They are a delightful group of people, really. And yeah, that's true. They are. Yeah. Speaking for yourself, yes. I go to several churches throughout the year, and over the years have done a lot of this kind of thing. And so you do get a feeling for what the church is like sometimes when you're sitting with the elders and the deacons and the ministers. And when there's that really comfortable banter between them, and they really enjoy being with each other, and they speak so highly of the church, that speaks highly of you. Because to a great extent, they're sort of a microcosm of what happens in the church as a whole. And so it has just been a joy. Let's see. Stephen mentioned I might introduce myself a little bit more. I'll go ahead and do that just for those of you who might want to know. I hail from western Kentucky, Mayfield to be exact. Some of you may be familiar with that neck of the woods, just south of Paducah. And born and raised there, loved being there, and actually was nurtured into preaching through my home church. The Northside Church of Christ. A fellow named John Hoover was the preacher there, and he was my mentor and sort of guided me into preaching. And went from there on to Freed-Hardeman College for 1 year, then to David Lipscomb College, which is what it was at the time. I mean, that's how old I am. I mean, I was there from 78 to 82, and it was David Lipscomb College. And Brother Willard Collins was the president. Some of you will recognize that name. And graduated from there, went on to Harding Graduate School of Religion in Memphis, and then on to Abilene Christian University. Of course, we joke around, we call these schools Freedom Hardly and David Liberal and Almost Christian University and Hardly a University and Scarcely Arkansas and that kind of thing. But since I taught at a lot of them, I actually get to say that, But I also spent a little bit of time at Preppydyne, studying non-degree stuff relative to conflict resolution. So, but those are sort of insider Church of Christ jokes. Every kid in the Church of the Christ grows up saying at some time, I think I might go to Harding, or I might go to Lipscomb, or, you can pick your school. But our schools sort of bind us together in a lot of ways because it creates that. But, one of the cool things about this when coming here is that having been at the Laurel Church in Knoxville gives me ties with several, I don't know if it's several of you, but a lot of you who went through Laurel and the University of Tennessee and the campus ministry and the student ministry there. And then they just fan out all over the United States. It's just kind of the nature of a big campus ministry church when that happens. But also, some of you had memories of the 1982 World's Fair that was hosted in Knoxville, and the Laurel Church of Christ was the one that organized the big booth, the energy booth that was right there at the front of the World's Fair. And so it's been nice to make a reconnection with some of the folks that have had history there at the Laurel Church as well. So I was told I would be teaching the Bible class, and so I asked the question, okay, do you want me to teach a Bible class that's kind of in line with what I did over the weekend, or I just teach a Bible class? And the idea was to have at least loosely related to what I did over the weekend. And so I've decided to go at it this direction. I want to ask you a question. What is your spiritual gift? I'm not asking that you answer it out loud. This is not one of those classes where I'm actually wanting you to answer stuff out loud because I plan What is your spiritual gift? I mean, we know part of what the text says, right? Over in Romans chapter 12, there is this statement beginning in verse 3, "For by grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts." And then there's a representative list of the gifts given here in Romans 12. It's not the full list, but it's probably the gifts that were especially important for what Paul was doing with the Romans in the letter. And so he lists them. We have different gifts according to the grace given to us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it's in serving, let him serve. If it's in teaching, let him teach. If it's in encouraging, let him encourage. If it's contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it's showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. But the assumption being, if you have a gift, the Apostle Paul said, whatever gift you have, I want you to use it, a term I could choose, I guess, use it zestfully. I mean, use it with all you have. If you have a gift of governance, then govern diligently. If you have the gift of generosity, then do it cheerfully. If you have the gift of teaching, then, it's kind of like bold print, all caps, teach. If you have the gift of prophesying, then prophesy. Do what you have to do. Make sure that you're putting all your energy into the exercise of that gift. But my experience has been in working with churches, most people, if they were to say, this is my gift, they really wouldn't know how to answer that question. Now, some of it's given the fact that in churches of Christ over the years, we've kind of slowly warmed up to the idea of even having spiritual gifts, right? There's been a natural fear within the churches of Christ that if you affirm the idea of spiritual gifts, then everybody's going to be shouting and dancing and jumping the pews. And we don't want that, so we just try to make sure that we curb our enthusiasm about spiritual gifts. But while there were, yes, those miraculous, what we call sign gifts in the New Testament, there are the enduring gifts within the church that help us to function as a body. And just as we are a body, like Paul says, just as every body has many parts, but they're all part of the same body, so each of us is a part of the body. And no one can be an ingrown toenail. No one can do that. It has to be a functioning part of the body. So you have to ask the question, what is your gift? Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I wonder how many would have to say, I don't know. My guess is that's most of us. I don't know. How many of you have watched Little House on the Prairie? Okay, that's just about everybody here. I think my daughters and my wife had every episode memorized of Little House on the Prairie. And many times I remember walking through the house as a dad, and I would hear that music. I would hear the music of that show, and then I would walk into the living room, and I'd see this picture of them running over that little hill through the daisies, and just thinking, and it was a beautiful picture of life. But sometimes, and they depicted life in little communities. And within the community, there was always a minister and always a church. A church was sort of the center of community life, in all the communities that they were a part of, which was true back then. That's why they were called parishes. Parish essentially means the idea of a neighborhood church, right? And some of you probably grew up during the time that the churches that were built, that you went to, were built for a particular neighborhood, right? But then we began to experience suburbia and the owning of cars and that sort of thing, to where that didn't matter as much. And so now we're kind of collective churches. Somebody told me that there are people from here, from different surrounding counties, traveling within 30, 35 minutes or maybe even longer to get here. Well, that's different than it was during those times, because people would ride their horses or their buggies or walk to church. But the church was central. And there was Pa Ingalls, right? I mean, he was the paterfamilias. Well, you ever wondered? I know this is probably a question that only preachers would ask, okay, but I'll go ahead and ask it. You ever wondered how Pa Ingalls knew what his gift was? I mean, I'm sure this text was read sometimes in church services when Pa Ingalls was going to church about using your gift, but how did he know what his gift was? I mean, they didn't have spirit. You ever taken a spiritual gifts inventory? You can go ahead and raise your hand. Some of you have probably taken a spiritual gifts inventory, all right? Which I think is, you have to be careful about spiritual gifts inventories. After you take them, the most obnoxious person in the room is always going to have the gift of prophecy. And somebody's going to say, well, I didn't see here the gift of criticism, because it's not a gift, right? But I wonder, he didn't have any kind of profile or inventory that he could take. But he just kind of circulated within the community, and people became accustomed to depending on Pa Ingalls for this or that. And over time, because of his service, his gift emerged. Do you see that? So I still ask you the question, what is your gift? I don't know that I understood what my gift was when I was growing up. I really didn't have a real sense of my gift. But even though most of us would probably struggle with being able to say, this is my gift, there's not a church eldership anywhere who doesn't want their members to be more involved. Okay, so let's shift from gifts to involvement for here just a moment. Because the idea is, right, that most of our leaderships look at our congregations, and there is what's called the Pareto principle, 20% of the work done by, or 80% of the work done by 20% of the people, 80% of the budget money coming from 20% of the givers, that kind of thing. Actually, it was an economic principle by Pareto, an Italian, that sort of we extrapolated and went to a lot of different places with that principle that it might not have been intended to go, but to some extent it's true. And we have this dream in our minds sometimes of, man, what it would be like if all of our people were deeply involved in using their gifts. So there's definitely the desire for that, whatever it might be. So even if you're not able to answer that question that I gave you, and I know most people cannot answer the question of what is your spiritual gift. That's been my experience. The question could be raised, how could I become more involved? How could I do that? I want to list 6 spiritual practices to activate your gifts. 6 spiritual practices to activate your gifts. Here's first. Number 1, those of you who like to take notes. Serve first. Serve first. Just serve. Just serve. Wherever there's a need, just serve. My mother passed away several years ago. Her name was Musette. It's a beautiful French name. She grew up in Savannah, Georgia during the Depression. And her mother, Ms. Inez Adams, took her and her 3 siblings to church literally every Sunday. That really was during the day that you would, mom would walk and the 4 kids would walk behind her. So if you can imagine a very dedicated, determined woman taking her 4 children to church, walking along Bull Street in Savannah, Georgia. For those of you who've been to that beautiful area of the city, she lived right near Forsyth Park. My mother grew up within eyesight of Forsyth Park when she would look out her front window. And they went to services. My mother was a beautiful soul. And I don't know that anyone would have ever been able to ask her what her gift was and she would be able to answer. But she knew how to encourage people. So let's just say she had the gift of encouragement. How did she discover that? Well, here's the way she did it. The people within her church, she would sense, I need to write a note of encouragement to them. And so she had You see this right here. It's a little memo book. I've got a collection of these like crazy. I've got a pile of them, all kinds of written. I know what's in them, so I don't want anybody messing with my notepads, right? I want you to imagine a steno pad. You know what I mean by a steno pad? You know, a little bit thicker, you know, and you turn the pages like this. Okay, she was a legal secretary for many years, so she learned how to use the steno pad, and she knew shorthand, and in fact, her longhand wasn't a whole lot better than her shorthand. So she would write us notes in shorthand, expect us to read them during the day. We didn't know what to do. So we just kind of did whatever we thought she wanted us to do, and hope when she got home it was what she asked us to do. But she would take that steno pad because she couldn't afford really nice stationery. She would take that steno pad and she would take her pen and she would write encouraging notes to people. And then she would take out her scissors and cut out all the little perforations at the top and cut out a really, really nice design with her scissors. Then she would fold up that note and put it in an envelope, just a basic white envelope. And she would put the address and her return address with a stamp, and she would send these encouraging notes to people all the time at the Northside Church of Christ in Mayfield, Kentucky. And all over the community, she would send these notes. And we knew that was sort of her ministry. And so when we had her funeral, the way we honored her is we set up a box with a steno pad at the side and pens. And you could take out a page from that steno pad and write a note to the family and put it in the box. There were, I don't know how many people, at least 50 people who came to that funeral with notes in hand from my mom, even with the envelope that she had written in her handwriting, the address and the name of the person who was to receive it. Serve first. You think about how many people were encouraged by that. When I was going through college, when I was going through Lipscomb, she sent me a note, literally every day. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't go to Box 701, DLC, Nashville, Tennessee, right there in the little post office, and I was able to pick out a note from Mom. And she always sent enough that even though mail didn't run sometimes on Saturdays and Sundays quickly enough in that post office, when I went in on Monday, I had 2 or 3. She just did that. My guess is she's sending notes to Peter and to Paul and to Moses and, to several others. And she's probably still filling out her Willard Conscion Bible study books, the fill-in-the-blank Bible study books. Some of you remember this. Okay, Willard Conscion was the one who wrote them, and it's basically where you looked at the Bible text and you filled in blanks. I mean, she had a collection of those, and she knew her Bible incredibly, incredibly well. She's probably doing that right now. Serve first. Serve first. Secondly, answer the opportunities. You see, when you serve, here's what happens. You serve based on what you perceive to be needs around you because you love people. Then so when you serve, that usually leads to somebody thinking, I bet Jim Bob can do that. I'm picking on Jim Bob just because that's kind of a generic name, right? If I said I'm Carlos, it would think, well, I know that guy, If I said Chuck, then you would know who I was talking about. I would be picking on Chuck, so I don't want to pick on Chuck, okay? So I'm just going to pick on Jim Bob. If your name's Jim Bob, sorry, I didn't know that. But say, somebody comes to Jim Bob and said, Jim Bob would be the right person for this. I know he would because they've observed your service, right? And so they come and they give you opportunity to do this. I grew up in a church where the young men were constantly asked to do talks from the time they were 6 weeks old. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. I mean, from the time you could stand up, you were asked as a young man to read scripture or to make a talk on Sunday night. And of course, you really got your initiation when you were asked to go make a devotional talk at the local nursing home, at Green Acres Nursing Home, which, I did that. I can't count how many times I did that. Growing up, I mean, the time would come. The second grade boys are going to be conducting the service at the Green Acres Nursing Home. And I would go and I would make talks. And, I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't. Thought I was going to be a musician. How many of you love the band Chicago? Come on, some of you old folks, you love Chicago? All right. Well, I did too. Jimmy Pankow, the trombone player, was my hero. I was a trombone guy. I practiced about 3 hours a day. I was going to be a professional musician. I was going to go to Murray State, major in music, music performance and music education, that kind of thing, and minor in business. And I was going to come out and I was going to have a band like Chicago. That's what I was going to do. I mean, you don't realize it until you study them. Jimmy Pankow wrote a lot of the really cool songs, and he was the trombone guy. Trombone guys rock. I mean, they rock the world, okay? Anyway, so I was going to do that, but I'd made a lot of talks. And there was this little church outside of Mayfield, Kentucky, the Barlow Church of Christ, near Wycliffe, which was basically known for its paper mill alongside the river, the Mississippi River. And so he was a preacher. One of my deacons was the preacher, a weekend preacher at that church. And he decided he didn't have time to do it anymore. And so I had just given a little hint to my preacher, John Hoover, that I might like to try doing a little preaching on the weekends. That's all it took. And so Jimmy Puckett comes up to me after services one Sunday night, and I was probably flirting around with some girl or something. I don't know what I was doing, and he interrupts it. And he comes there and he gives me a Bible, Burton Kaufman, he holds out his Bible, but on top of it is Burton Kaufman's commentary on 1 Corinthians and a map to this little church. And he said, this little church needs a preacher next Sunday, and I told him you'd be there. I felt compelled by his boldness to do that. He used to be my Sunday school teacher, my baseball coach. I thought one of his daughters was really cute, so I thought, I might as well do what he asked me. I was 17 years old, midway through my junior year in high school, wearing a leisure suit, okay? And, I had the long hair. It's 70s, okay, so I had the long hair. And so I went and preached for this little church. I preached the sermon. It's probably the worst sermon that's ever been preached in the history of the Churches of Christ, called Payday Someday, the story of Ahab and Jezebel. I actually borrowed it from a book of sermon outlines by Leroy Brownlow entitled Seed for the Sower. And I was young, so plagiarism was okay, right? I didn't know how to put together my own sermons, so I just preached somebody else's sermon. I got up there and I preached that sermon, and I actually used the language that was in the sermon outline book. Ahab was a vile human toad, and Jezebel was the wicked witch of the ancients. I found out later that he copied Robert G. Lee, who was the prolific preacher at the Bellevue Baptist Church over in Memphis, Tennessee, who was actually the first one to preach it. I listened later on to an LP with Robert G. Lee, who was preaching that sermon. And sure enough, I found out that I had projected my voice in the correct way. That when he referred to, Ahab as a vile human toad, it sounded exactly like that. So I preached that sermon. I mean, it was one of those sermons where you had in your notes, stomp here, pound the pulpit here. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was close. I had no clue what I was doing. And after services, 2 of the 3 men who were members of this little 16 or 17 member church came up to me and said, we ain't got no elders around here. One of them died and the other one quit. And we used to be Free Will Baptists and became members of the Church of Christ. When we were Free Will Baptists, we could have been deacons, but we can't be deacons now here because we don't have any elders. So we men, we just kind of stand around sometimes and we make decisions. And we had a little meeting back there, and we decided we want you to come back every Sunday. I can still see Brother Rich standing with me talking in that way. And I said, well, okay, I guess I will. I received my call to preach through the love of that little church. Just simply answering the opportunity. Now, dotted all over this audience are stories just like that. Somebody tapped you 40 years ago to keep the nursery, and you're still doing it. And some of you might say, yeah, I'm still doing it. Can't find anybody else to take it. But if somebody else were willing to take it, you might be willing to give it up, you might not. Because you start loving those little kids. Answer the opportunity. Because you never know what that can lead to. Next, accept the challenges. Accept the challenges. Because sometimes what somebody comes up and asks you to do, it's going to feel like a challenge. I mean, I felt like I knew how to speak, so it wasn't that wasn't a hard thing for me to work my way into. I felt, kind of like it was a little bold for him to ask me the way he asked me, but then again, he was an authority figure in my life, and so I thought, okay, I'll do this. But there was another time accepting the challenge. I had no idea that I had gifts of administration. I really didn't. I mean, I was, again, 17 years old, had no idea, really. It never had really come to me that I had that capacity to do that. The two youth deacons at our church, one of them, Gary Smith, still there as a member of that church, retired Kentucky State policeman, detective. And they came up to me and they said, Carlos, we need a youth rally that hails right out of here in the Northside Church of Christ for the area youth. We've been needing something like that for a long time. And we met about that, and we determined that you and Al Jean Steele together as a team, you guys could organize that youth rally, and we think it would be great if you're doing that. We'll be here to support you. We've talked to the elders already. We're fine for you to do this. And I looked at Gary, and I said, Gary, I've never done anything like this. I mean, I really don't know. He said, you just try it, and I think you're going to find it's a natural fit. And so Al Jean Steele, a good buddy of mine, he and I put together a youth rally. And we did discover a few things. You don't ever know sometimes what you can do until somebody challenges you. You really don't know until somebody challenges you. I will ask for a show of hands on this. How many of you are doing things now in work for the church that you never would have thought you would do until somebody challenged you to do it? Any of you? Look around the room. You see this? Somebody challenged you. Somebody believed in you more than you believed in yourself, perhaps, at the time, and they challenged you. They tapped you and said, would you please do this? Are you getting the picture here that most of us, in using our gifts and discovering what those gifts are and in serving, it's really kind of an organic process, right? It's kind of an organic process that over time you just kind of discover things. But then let me give you the third. Let me give you the third piece here. Actually, the fourth, I believe it is, right? Serve first, answer the opportunity, accept the challenges. Number 4, affirm the ordinary. Affirm the ordinary. By the way, what time am I supposed to be done? 1:15. Good. I got 15 whole minutes. Man, that's great. Okay. Affirm the ordinary. In other words, sometimes the needs within the church are greater than your sense of what you should be doing. You affirm the ordinary tasks that need to be done, and you just do them. Most ministry in the church is more need-based than gift-based. I know that's going to sound a little odd, but it's true. This same little church where I started preaching had a song leader. His name was Brother Wood. To this day, I do not know his first name. He probably told me at some point what his first name was, but I was 17. I referred to everybody as Mr. and Mrs. and brother and sister. So his name was Brother Wood. And he would get up there, and he had a collection of, like, I think maybe 8 songs that he could sing. His favorite was Beulah Land, but it was the "Oh Beulah Land, Sweet Beulah Land," and they would sing this song. And they actually kept the corn and wine phrase. They didn't have love divine. It was corn and wine. That's probably some Baptist songbook. Who knows? But he would lead those songs, and the way he would lead them, literally, is he would get up there and he would announce the song, and he would get up there. And I noticed that he did this. And when he did this, we started the song. And I just kind of observed that. I was a little bit of a musician during that time, so I sort of observed this. And I went up to him one day. I said, Brother Wood, how did you become a song leader? Not that I was challenging his capacity to lead singing, although I probably could have challenged his capacity to lead singing, but I never did. I appreciated what he was willing to do. He said, well, one day we showed up here at the building, and it was real cold, real cold. I remember it was cold. The heater wasn't working. Only about half of us were here, and I was the only man in the group, and, you know, we can't have women song leaders. So I got up there. They asked me to lead the song. Now, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. You probably noticed that, but I can't carry a tune in a bucket. So I got up, and I just announced a song that I felt like we all knew. And Miss Okie Biassy, she sits right here at the front, and she was a music teacher in elementary school here for a number of years, so I knew she knew how to sing and start it right. And so I would announce the song, and when I would do this, I would lift up the songbook, and on the downbeat, that was her signal that I wanted her to start the song from her pew. And that's how I became a song leader, and that's still the way I do it. And sure enough, he would do this, and Miss Biassy would be watching, and she would sometimes actually give the tune. You know, she was the tuning fork of the church because she didn't want. She said, I went to her one time, and she said, yeah, I started doing that because Brother Wood would start it off key all the time. So I had to give the right key, and he just kept on leading singing because it was affirming the ordinary, right? It was affirming the ordinary. Brother Bradley was at this church. I knew him because he signed my checks. A.H. Bradley. And Brother Bradley was a kind gentleman, but he also had difficulty staying awake during my sermons. I'm not exactly sure why. I suspect he just didn't sleep all that well. And so usually about 2 or 3 minutes into my sermon, Brother Bradley would be, everybody could hear him. I mean, he was just back there, you know. Well, one day his top plate was bothering him a little bit. So he decided before his nap, he would just take out that top plate and put it right there beside him. And I don't know what happened. I may have startled him. Something else may have happened to startle him. I don't know what it was. But he woke up, and when he did, that right arm just went and swooped those teeth all the way up on that concrete floor, up to the front. And there's Miss Biassy, Miss Okie Biassy. She looks down there, sitting down. I'm preaching while all this is happening. And she looked back. I think those are Brother Bradley's teeth. So she gets a tissue, and she picks them up and hands them back, and they go from pew to pew until they find their way back to Brother Bradley, and he pops in his mouth. Great big old smile. He didn't go to sleep for the rest of that sermon. Pretty ordinary church. Pretty ordinary church. But do you know that that church accepted their call to train 10 young men who are still preaching today? 10. Bobby Crittenden, me, David Powell, who just retired from teaching at Freed Hardeman for many years. I could list several from Western Kentucky that learned how to preach through the love of that little church. I mean, they would bring me Gospel Advocate quarterly commentaries and just, contribute them to me. So I wanted to contribute to your library. I got more old copies of Cruden's Concordance than I could ever do anything with, but they were helping build my library. There's one who brought me every back issue of The Spiritual Sword, and just gave them to me. Said, I thought you might be able to use this. I couldn't read half the article, didn't even know what they said, but they were doing what they could to help me get started. Affirming ordinary. When I was teaching at Johnson University, Johnson Bible College, which became Johnson University over in Knoxville, I had a lesson that I delivered from time to time to chapel. We had chapel twice a week, and it was an hour long each time. Some of you who went to chapel in Christian colleges and had to sit through 30 minutes of it, you try an hour twice a week, okay? Full-length sermons, it was a big deal. I had a lesson I delivered called Tables and Chairs. Tables and Chairs. that a lot of the work you do in ministry is just moving tables and chairs, the ordinary things. But then, next, show the initiative. Show the initiative. Show the initiative. Well, I started preaching at the Darby Drive Church in Florence, Alabama, several years ago when I think I was around 27 at the time. It now is the Crosspoint Church in Florence, for those who know anything about the Florence, Alabama area. And when I started preaching there, 2 or 3 weeks into my ministry, there was this woman who rolled in her wheelchair, as bright and cheerful a woman, I think, as I had met at that point, and her name was Dorothy. And she came in, and she motioned to me to come over to her chair, and I did, and I started talking with her, and she said, I just want you to know, during your sermon, I'm going to be praying for you in virtually every word you speak. You can count on it, that I will be your number one prayer warrior while you are preaching. And she said, I know a whole lot of people ask you to come visit them. But she said, one day if you would reserve an hour and come by and visit with me, I would love for you to do that. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went and visited with Miss Dorothy. I walked into her house, and she had caregivers because she literally could not get out of her wheelchair on her own. And there she was on her bed. It was a huge king-size bed. And she was surrounded on two sides. On one side was her Bible study library. On the other side of her was a great big phone that had the 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, good. That's about how long it's going to take me to do this. Okay. Had those great big pads on the phone, that you had that you could probably had to for her because she was very arthritic. And it was a phone and a collection of stationery type material. Okay. She had a ministry that she did from right there at her bedside, a World Bible School. And she did correspondence Bible courses with men in the maximum security prison of the state of Alabama. And she got to know these people really, really well. She wrote them letters during their birthdays, during the holidays. She had this special ministry for those precious beloved persons behind bars, and actually took up a small collection in each of the Bible classes, and they would contribute money toward her ministry. She kept the budget going. She did everything. And she had a ministry that connected to that. She had a ministry of Bible reading to these prisoners. And that was back during a time that the prisoners would get phone privileges at the payphone. And they would go and they would call Miss Dorothy. They had no one else to call. And they would call Miss Dorothy. And for 5 minutes, Dorothy would read the Bible to them over the phone in her voice. Most of the time, when those men set down the phone, they were in tears. Because they'd never had a woman, a mama, who cared enough about them to read the Bible to them in the way that she did. And after a while, a line formed on those nights. And as soon as one prisoner finished his 5 minutes, he handed the phone to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one. And there were some nights, the guards told us, that 20, 25 prisoners would wait in line for Miss Dorothy to read the Bible to them. Anytime I'm close to making excuses, I think of this woman who was severely arthritic and was totally dependent on others to be able to go to the bathroom, to be able to eat. And I think she showed the initiative. Now here's what happens in my last 3 minutes here. When you do this, when you serve first, when you answer the opportunity, when you accept the challenges, when you affirm the ordinary, when you show the initiative, You pay attention to and affirm what God does through you and others. You pay attention to and affirm what God does through you and others. That's how you discover your gifts. And you might not even be able to say, this is my gift, or these are my gifts. You might not ever even be able to say it, but that's okay. Because my guess is still that if my mother were here and I said, Mom, what is your spiritual gift? She probably would not be able to answer that question. So you remember I asked you the question based on Romans 12. I could have gone to 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Peter 4. There are other texts that we could have gone to that list this same principle. And yes, it's true. I don't know of a church anywhere that doesn't want their members to be more involved. How do you do that? Serve first. Answer the opportunity. Accept the challenges. Affirm the ordinary. Show the initiative. And as you do that, you pay attention to and affirm what God does through you and others. And the church grows, and the people are blessed. Let's close with prayer. Father, thank you for bringing us together this morning. I pray that something has been done or said this morning to give that little ounce of encouragement, just the right push, for someone to either feel affirmed in what they are already